The first thing anyone noticed in the private dining salon of the Al Mirage Hotel was the light. That cold, hammered silver glow cast by a chandelier older than the country itself. Beneath it, at a long obsidian table, a sheikh worth more than several small nations held a platinum Mont Blanc above a contract valued at $240 million. The room had been cleared. Security waited behind mirrored glass. Every breath felt measured. She stood at the corner of the table, invisible by design. Hair tied back, uniform stiff with steam press precision, posture curved inward to take up less space. To them, she was only the waitress. Her real name, Layla Haddad, floated nowhere in the room. Her job was to pour tea, refill glasses, and watch the clock. Nothing more. But the contract lying before the sheikh had been printed on vellum, too smooth to be genuine, and ink too uniformly black to be historical. She didn't mean to notice. Her eyes simply did what they had been trained to do long before her academic life collapsed under debt and humiliation. She had seen a fragment of that same script once, years before. The real version. And it had not looked like this. The sheikh leaned forward, muttering to his advisors in a clipped Gulf dialect, irritated at the delay caused by a minor typo an assistant had spotted. He tapped the signature line impatiently. That was when she bent to pour his tea. She saw the final clause, half covered by the edge of the folder. A single syntactic structure that should not have existed in the era the document claimed to be from. A linguistic impossibility. Without meaning to, or maybe finally meaning to. She whispered in a low, steady voice, speaking the same dialect he had just used to mock one of his men. "You got this wrong." He froze. The pen stopped mid-air. He lifted his eyes to her, and for the first time, truly saw her. He stared at her walking away, unable to understand how he had missed someone like her. No one in the room breathed for several seconds after she walked away. The sheikh's advisors exchanged quick, embarrassed glances, unsure whether to laugh, scold, or pretend it had never happened. A waitress correcting a $240 million historical acquisition. It was absurd on its face, an insult, a breach of protocol, a humiliation. But the sheikh was not laughing. He gestured sharply for the head of staff. The man rushed over. "Bring her back," the sheikh ordered, his voice clipped with the same Gulf inflection he had used earlier. The one meant to remind everyone of hierarchy, of who was allowed to speak and who wasn't. When Layla returned, her hands were tightly clasped behind her back. She kept her eyes down, as if apologizing with her entire posture. She knew the rule. Staff should never be noticed, much less heard. Her throat tightened with the familiar heat of shame, a sensation she had carried since the day her fellowship was revoked, and she was left in the city with nothing but debts and a fading academic dossier. The sheikh leaned back, studying her with cold curiosity. "Repeat what you said," he demanded. His advisor smirked, expecting her to wilt. Instead, she lifted her gaze just enough to meet his eyes. Then answered him not in the dialect he used, but in flawless classical Arabic, the kind that turned the air into carved crystal. "You asked for authenticity," she said. "But this document contains a structure that wasn't used in that century. It's incorrect." The smirks fell away. Her voice betrayed a tremor, but her grammar did not. Each syllable cut through the room with unsettling authority. "You speak classical Arabic?" one of the advisors asked, incredulous. "She lives it," the sheikh muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. A single bead of sweat slid down the wrist that held his pen. Something about her tone, steady, unadorned, almost apologetic, carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what she was saying and wished she didn't. But he couldn't show fear in front of his team. He straightened, masking uncertainty with irritation. "You're a waitress," he said. "Pour tea. Do not comment on matters you cannot understand." Her cheeks flamed. She lowered her head again, gripping the tray until her knuckles whitened. She wanted to disappear, to shrink back into the safety of invisibility. But her mind, trained in ancient linguistics, philology, and manuscript authentication, wouldn't obey. It kept replaying the anomaly she had seen, and her heart kept whispering the truth she feared. Once you see a trap, you can't unsee it. She retreated to the service alcove just outside the private salon, a narrow corridor lined with glassware and silent panic, and pressed her back to the cold marble wall. Her breath shivered in and out, too shallow, too fast. She hated herself for speaking, hated the way her voice had escaped her body before she could stop it. Invisibility had been her only form of safety. Before the collapse, she had been the top candidate for a doctoral program she could never finish. The debt swallowed her first, then the visa complications, then the internship that turned into unpaid experience, then the job that evaporated overnight. She had slept in friends' living rooms, applied for positions she was absurdly overqualified for, and accepted the first stable paycheck offered. Waiting tables in a hotel where the wealthy pretended history was a luxury they could purchase. Nobody here knew her work on early Arabic syntax. Nobody cared about her thesis on script evolution. She had trained herself to speak little, move softly, and avoid eye contact. A ghost with an apron. But the fragment she had seen in the contract, that wasn't just a detail. It wasn't something she could pretend away. The structure belonged to a linguistic form introduced 3 centuries after the manuscript's claimed origin. It was the kind of mistake only someone mimicking authenticity would make. One of the senior waiters passed her, tapping her arm lightly. "You okay? They want you to stay in the room for the presentation. Don't worry, just stand there. Invisible." Invisible. The safest word she knew. She smoothed her uniform, forced her expression into neutrality, and stepped back into the dining salon. The atmosphere had tightened. The advisors spoke in low tones, casting glances at her as though she were an unexpected variable in an already fragile equation. The sheikh avoided looking at her entirely, which was somehow worse. A man in a navy suit, the lead consultant for the acquisition, clicked a remote. The lights dimmed to a warm amber. A holographic projection flickered to life above the table. The manuscript, the seals, the provenance certificates, the valuation timeline. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "what you are about to witness is the most pristine, uninterrupted chain of historical ownership ever documented for a pre-modern Arabic manuscript." She stood against the wall, hands clasped, eyes down, but her mind sharpened, unwilling to be quiet now. Every detail mattered. Every word was a thread tugging at something she wasn't ready to unravel. Staying quiet wasn't the same as not seeing, and the danger of knowing is that it makes silence feel like complicity. The consultant's voice flowed through the dimmed salon like velvet over stone, confident, rehearsed, unshakably proud of the presentation he had delivered 100 times before. The holographic manuscript rotated slowly in the air, each page glowing with artificial reverence. But Layla felt a quiet dread settle beneath her ribs. She had seen this performance style before. Oversell the aesthetic, drown the audience in technical jargon, and keep the pace brisk enough that no one had time to examine the details. Prestige as camouflage. "Note the continuity of script," the consultant said, pointing with a laser-gloved hand. "Perfect curvature, consistent stroke width, and immaculate preservation." Perfect, immaculate, preserved. Words meant to create certainty, not evidence. Her eyes tracked the projection. The margins too symmetrical, the ligatures too uniform, the aging a little too theatrical. A manuscript that old should show tiny fractures where the scribe lifted the quill. Here, the lines ended with a machine-like cleanliness. But she stayed silent, Her palms grew damp. The sheikh sat forward, elbows on the table, his facade of irritation shifting into something sharper. Desire. He wanted this deal to be real. He wanted the glory of owning a seminal piece of heritage more than he wanted the truth to be inconvenient. "Proceed," he ordered. The consultant smiled. "Now, regarding legal provenance." He tapped a button. A cascade of certificates filled the projection. Transfers, notarizations, export permissions, custody reports. Layla felt her throat tighten. One document flashed by too quickly. A certificate with an embossed seal she had seen only once before, during the 1 month she interned at a manuscript archive before being unceremoniously dismissed. She couldn't place it yet, but something about the curvature of the lettering and the spacing around the seal felt off. Wrong century, wrong authority, wrong texture. Her pulse picked up. She shifted her weight, just enough that her shoe clicked softly against the marble. The sheikh's gaze darted toward her for half a second, irritation flickering again. But behind it, something else. Suspicion, maybe, or fear that he had underestimated her earlier comment. The consultant continued, oblivious. "The final clause," he said, "ensures exclusive rights of display and reproduction. Once signed, the manuscript becomes undisputed property of His Excellency." Exclusive. Undisputed. Irrevocable. 3 words that always came with traps. Her breath hitched. She didn't know why they wanted her in the room, but she suspected it wasn't an accident. Staff were expected to stand still and keep their heads down. But they were also witnesses. Dispensable, forgettable, and convenient. She folded her hands behind her back to stop them from trembling. Silence was safety, but her mind refused safety. It kept replaying that seal, that ink, that impossible syntactic structure. Tiny inconsistencies forming a shape she didn't want to recognize. The consultant raised the contract. "Your Excellency, we are ready for signature." And she understood in that moment. Some rooms erase you. Others force you to decide whether you still exist at all. The consultant placed the contract on the obsidian table with ceremonial precision, aligning it so the signature line pointed directly at the sheikh, like a blade guiding its own insertion. The room brightened by a fraction, as if the sensors sensed a decisive moment approaching. "Before the signing," he said smoothly, "our resident experts will offer a brief final confirmation." 2 men stepped forward, one a pale antiquities appraiser with glasses too small for his face, the other a historian whose confidence filled the room before he spoke. The appraiser began. "Your Excellency, the vellum fibers show no evidence of modern compression techniques. Structure is consistent with pre-industrial preparation." Layla's shoulders tightened. Too consistent, she thought. Real vellum from that era carried micro-variations, tiny irregularities from the craftsman's hand. These fibers were uniform enough to be lab-grown. The historian continued. "The script is a flawless example of its period. No modern intrusions, no revision marks, no inconsistencies." A lie wrapped in eloquence. She had seen the inconsistency, the syntactic anachronism, the ink that dried too evenly. But what struck her most wasn't what they praised. It was what they avoided. No mention of the seal on the provenance certificate, no mention of carbon dating, no mention of the binding thread composition. Avoidance is its own admission. The sheikh's advisors nodded approvingly. One of them even dared a satisfied smirk in her direction, an unspoken, "See, waitress, stay in your place." Her chest tightened with that familiar humiliation. The emotional muscle memory of being dismissed, diminished, erased. She could almost hear her former academic supervisor's words when he cut her fellowship. "You don't belong in this field. Someone else will finish what you started." But the manuscript on the hologram, It looked like the very one she had tried to study before losing everything. Only now it was being weaponized, dressed up as authenticity to deceive a man whose pride was more valuable than truth. The historian ended his assessment with a flourish. This artifact is, without question, a once-in-a-lifetime treasure. The last word echoed. Treasure. History. Proof. The sheikh leaned back, satisfied. Good. Bring me the pen. A silver tray slid forward with the Mont Blanc resting like a surgical instrument. The sheikh held it lightly, testing the weight. The cap clicked open with a sound that felt ominously final. Layla felt the air thicken. There was no space left for doubt. But every time her pulse surged, she forced it down. Not yet. Not yet. Not yet. The consultant glanced at her, not with suspicion, but with annoyance, the way one looks at furniture that's slightly out of place. "Staff may now remain silent," he said. He didn't know silence was the most dangerous thing she could offer. A universal truth settled in her chest like a warning. When everyone insists something is perfect, it usually means no one has dared to look closely. The sheikh lowered the pen toward the contract, and the room inhaled as one. Anticipation, ambition, and arrogance woven into a single collective breath. The holographic pages rotated lazily above the table, their glow casting faint ripples across the obsidian surface like light moving over deep water. Layla stood against the wall, spine straight, hands clasped behind her back. Her uniform felt too tight at the collar, as though it were slowly closing around her throat. She tried to focus on her breathing, but every sound in the room sharpened. The soft rustle of the sheikh's robe, the barely audible hum of the projector, the brittle excitement of the consultants who felt the deal slipping into their grasp. And beneath it all, a quiet drumbeat in her mind. Something is wrong with the seal. The embossed mark on the provenance certificate, that was the piece she couldn't unsee now. During her brief internship at the archive, she had catalogued a similar seal from the same region. The pressure marks then had been irregular, created from a hand-forged brass mold. But the one projected now was near perfect symmetry. Hand-forged seals do not produce perfect symmetry. The implication settled like a weight against her ribs. Someone had cast a modern replica and backdated the certificate. She swallowed hard, forcing her breath steady. "Proceed," the consultant urged, his voice trembling with excitement he tried to hide. 2 decades of failed deals were about to be redeemed by this moment, if no one questioned anything, and no one except her could. Her gaze moved to the sheikh. His eyelids were half lowered, expression composed, but his left hand, the one resting on the arm of the chair, betrayed him. One finger tapped, slow and steady, the way it did whenever he wanted something so badly he refused to evaluate it. Pride makes wealthy men blind. Invisibility makes brilliant women silent. A dangerous combination. Before we finalize, the historian added quickly, I can affirm that the legal language within the accompanying clause is entirely consistent with... That was when Layla heard it. A phrase she recognized. A phrase she had studied. A phrase that should not exist in any legal document before the 18th century. Her pulse surged. Not only was the manuscript wrong, not only was the seal suspicious, the accompanying clause had been drafted with a legal formula invented 500 years too late. A fraud layered inside a fraud. She shifted her stance, heart pounding, but the consultant shot her a warning glance, as if her mere existence threatened the choreography of the moment. The sheikh lifted the pen. The advisors leaned in. The contract lay open, waiting to swallow him whole. Layla felt the room tilt, as though fate had placed its hand on her back, pushing her slowly, gently, towards something she could no longer avoid. Sometimes the truth doesn't scream. It simply refuses to let you leave the room. The pen hovered inches above the contract, close enough that the soft ambient light reflected along its platinum barrel. Everything in the room seemed to narrow toward that point. Wealth, pride, vanity, hope, and deception compressed into the moment before ink met vellum. Layla's pulse thudded in her ears. The sheikh's advisors leaned forward with the hunger of men who needed this deal to shape their careers. The consultants wore expressions crafted for victory photos. Even the security behind the mirrored glass straightened subtly, sensing a shift toward finality. Only Layla stayed still, but inside, the threads were tightening. She replayed every clue in her mind, like a forensic reel. The ink, with its unnaturally uniform saturation, the vellum fibers that lacked the microscopic inconsistencies of hand-prepared material, the seal, too symmetrical, too crisp, the legal clause using a syntactic structure centuries premature, the provenance certificate whose spacing hinted at modern kerning. One inconsistency could be error, two could be carelessness, five formed a blueprint, a trap designed by someone who understood greed better than history. The consultant stepped closer to the sheikh, lowering his voice to a reverent tone. "Your Excellency, this manuscript will anchor your legacy for decades. Scholars will remember this night." He wanted the sheikh to sign quickly. Fast decisions favor those hiding something. Layla's throat tightened. She remembered sitting in her academic mentor's office years before, listening as he told her she lacked the temperament for high-level scholarship. What he meant was, you notice too much, you question too much, you don't stay quiet when powerful people need silence. That flaw now pulsed in her like a heartbeat. The sheikh touched the contract with the tip of the pen. A collective breath inflated the room. "Everything is in order?" he asked, not looking at anyone in particular. "Yes," the consultant lied without blinking. Layla's fingers tightened behind her back until her nails pressed crescent shapes into her skin. The truth had reached a critical mass inside her body, too heavy to swallow, too dangerous to release. Her entire life had been one long rehearsal for silence, but silence here was complicity, and complicity could cost this man not just money, but reputation, political leverage, and years of legal bondage hidden inside those clauses. She exhaled slowly. Her voice stayed in her throat, but her resolve did not. If he signed now, the damage would be irreversible. There is a precise moment when fear becomes smaller than the truth you carry. The pen touched the vellum. Not signing, not yet, just grazing it. When Layla heard a sound that didn't belong. A crisp crackle, so faint it could have been mistaken for static, but she recognized it instantly. Modern chemical aging. Real vellum flexes softly, like old skin. Artificially distressed vellum, treated with chemical accelerants, fractures with a brittle undertone. Archivists call it the ghost crack. A sound no authentic manuscript older than 5 centuries should ever make. She felt it before she processed it. Her chest constricted. Her breath froze. She had heard that exact crack once before, during her short-lived archive internship, when a forged Ottoman decree shattered under minimal handling. The memory hit her with the force of a slap. The sheikh didn't notice. No one noticed, except her. She took a single step forward, unthinking. Just enough that her shoe made a soft scrape across the marble. Every head snapped toward her, the consultant's eyes sharpened, the historian frowned. One of the advisors let out an audible sigh, the kind reserved for servants who don't understand their lane. But the sheikh? He watched her the way a man watches a shadow that has suddenly begun to speak. Layla swallowed hard, forcing her voice steady. "Your Excellency, the document..." The consultant cut in instantly. "Staff are not authorized." But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her voice emerged again, low but unmistakable. "That sound shouldn't exist." A ripple of unease moved through the room. The historian cleared his throat. What sound exactly? She took another step, inching into the glow of the chandelier, no longer a ghost in uniform, but a silhouette trembling with a truth she wished she didn't know. Quietly, deliberately, authentic vellum of that age bends. It never cracks. The words hung in the air, like a blade. The consultant laughed, brittle and forced. This is absurd. She is a waitress. But the sheikh raised his hand, silencing him instantly. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous register. What do you mean? It never cracks. Layla's pulse hammered, but she kept her eyes steady on the contract. She spoke clearly, each word delivered with surgical precision. Because the collagen in vellum that old has already reached equilibrium. It softens with time. If it cracks, it means someone aged it artificially, recently. A suffocating silence hardened the air. The sheikh lowered the pen, slowly, very slowly. The consultants exchanged panicked glances. The historian's face drained of color, and the advisors shifted, suddenly unsure of their footing. Layla stood alone in the center of the storm she had just unleashed. The truth had slipped out of her mouth before she could stop it. Sometimes a single wrong sound is enough to unravel everything built on it. For a moment, no one moved. The room felt suspended, as though the air itself refused to participate in the lie anymore. The sheikh stared at the contract, fingers curled away from it as if it were suddenly contaminated. His advisors shifted uneasily, recalibrating their loyalties in real time. The consultants exchanged microscopic glances, fear coded into the twitch of their eyelids. And Layla understood something terrifying. They were going to ignore her. They would steamroll the truth. They would absorb her words as background noise. They would sign anyway. A waitress interrupting a $240 million acquisition. Unthinkable. Easier to pretend she hadn't spoken at all. The consultant forced a calm smile, leaning closer to the sheikh. Your Excellency, vellum reacts unpredictably under changes in humidity. The staff area is warmer. It may have caused a stress sound, nothing to be concerned about. A lie wrapped in authority. He moved the contract forward again. Please, we're ready. And for the first time in years, Layla felt the precise moment when her instincts crossed the threshold of silence. It was like a click inside her chest, small, final, irreversible. She stepped forward, not a hesitant inch, a full stride. Your Excellency, she said, voice steady, if you sign this, you will lose ownership of the manuscript the moment a dispute arises. Every advisor jerked their head toward her. The consultant's mask cracked. The historian whispered, "What is she doing?" But the sheikh did not look away. "Explain," he said. His voice was a command. Layla's throat tightened. Her hands trembled behind her back. She felt her entire life pressing on her from all sides. The debts, the failures, the shame, the hundreds of invisible hours spent refilling glasses and praying not to be noticed. Now all that invisibility condensed into one unbearable spotlight. She inhaled, and she answered him in flawless, classical Arabic, each word carved, precise, unyielding. The legal clause you're about to sign contains a reversal formula. It shifts the burden of proof to you, meaning, even if the manuscript is real, you will be treated as if you forged it. The sheikh blinked. Once, slow. She continued. And there is another line, hidden in the secondary paragraph, that grants the seller legal indemnity. They cannot be sued. They cannot be challenged. They cannot even be named. The entire room stiffened. She took another breath, her voice quiet but devastating. If you sign, this document becomes a weapon against you. The consultant lurched forward, face red. This is outrageous. She is lying. Enough, the sheikh snapped. the word cutting the air like a blade. Silence detonated across the room. Now every eye was on her. No more invisibility, no more safety. There was only the truth and the terrifying responsibility of having spoken it aloud. The sheikh leaned back, studying her with new, sharpened eyes. "Show me," he said. And in that instant, she felt the shift, the irreversible tilt from fear to confrontation, the moment when a quiet woman becomes the axis on which everything turns. Layla approached the table slowly, each step echoing louder than footsteps should. She felt the eyes of billionaires, advisors, and hired experts pressing against her spine. But something inside her had already crossed a threshold. She was no longer reacting. She was revealing. The sheikh slid the contract toward her with a single gesture. No anger, no impatience, only the sharpened stillness of a man who senses he has been led toward a cliff's edge. "Show me," he repeated. She exhaled, steadying her trembling hands, and leaned over the document. The vellum glowed under the chandelier's cold light, its surface too perfect to belong to history. Her voice came out low and controlled. First, the ink. She pointed to the edge of one stroke, a tiny line so thin most people wouldn't have noticed it in a lifetime. Ancient ink dries unevenly. It feathers. It seeps along the fiber lines. But here, she shifted the page slightly. The saturation is identical along every centimeter. That only happens with synthetic carbon mixes. Modern. The historian sputtered. Ink density varies depending on... She cut him off with a single raised finger. Not disrespect, precision. Second, the vellum. She lifted the corner gently. It bent, but the movement was wrong. Too elastic near the edges, too brittle near the center. Authentic vellum maintains consistent flexibility across the sheet. This one reacts in zones. That happens when someone uses chemical baths to accelerate the aging process. The sheikh's jaw tightened. She continued. Third, the seal. She tapped the hologram still rotating above the table. Real seals of that authority were pressed with uneven pressure. The brass molds were hand-cut. Symmetry is impossible. She zoomed the projection with a fingertip. Look here. And here. Two halves. Perfect mirror images. The consultant's face drained of color. That seal was made with laser-cut precision, she said softly. A technology invented centuries after the document's claimed date. A slow realization crept across the sheikh's expression, disbelief giving way to fury, not at her, but at what had been done to him. Continue, he said. She swallowed, bracing herself. The fourth issue is in the script. A specific syntactic structure appears twice in the document. That structure did not exist until the 13th century, but the manuscript is dated to the 10th. Silence, heavy, unavoidable. And finally, she added, voice quieter still, the clause. She placed her finger under the disputed line. The sheikh leaned closer. This phrasing is not ancient. It's modern legal strategy disguised as medieval rhetoric. It transfers legal liability to you while granting immunity to the seller. Even if the manuscript is authentic, which it isn't, you would lose any case before it begins. A muscle in the sheikh's cheek twitched. His advisors shifted uncomfortably. The consultant opened his mouth, but the sheikh didn't let him speak. You knew, the sheikh said, voice a calm so dangerous it felt like cold metal. The consultant froze. Layla stepped back from the table, hands clasped again, breath trembling but steady enough to hold her ground. She had stripped the lie bare. Some deceptions collapse at once. Others fall apart slowly, like silk unraveling under its own weight. The sheikh's gaze locked on the clause she had indicated. The room grew so quiet she could hear the soft hum of the climate controls, fighting to maintain the manuscript's staged environmental conditions. His advisors shifted, their faces tightening with the first hints of dread. Dread of having missed something catastrophic. Dread of their own proximity to humiliation. Layla inhaled slowly. "The trap," she said, "is not in the forged manuscript. It's in the contract drafted around it." She pointed to a narrow block of text. Dense, elegantly typeset, deceptively harmless. "This paragraph appears to define your rights as the buyer, but the structure is inverted." The consultant moved forward quickly. "Your Excellency, she is misinterpreting." The sheikh raised a hand. The same gesture as before. But this time it carried the unmistakable weight of a verdict. "Silence. Explain," he commanded. Layla stepped closer to the table, her finger tracing the boundary of the clause. Not touching, just indicating the way she had learned when handling authentic artifacts years earlier. "This line," she said, "uses a legal construction that looks archaic at first glance. It mimics early Arabic contractual language. But the syntax is wrong. Very wrong. No early jurist would write this." She angled the page slightly toward the light. "It appears to grant you exclusive rights to the manuscript." She paused. "But in reality, the phrasing removes your right to dispute authenticity at all." One of the advisors frowned. "That makes no sense. Why would any buyer agree to that?" "That," she replied calmly, "is the brilliance of the trap." She tapped the text again. "This sentence binds you to accept the manuscript as is, under all circumstances. And this next line." She pointed to a softer, fainter phrase almost blended into the margin. "This line states that any challenge to authenticity will be interpreted as a breach of contract by you." The sheikh's eyes widened a fraction. "It gets worse," she continued. "If you discover the manuscript is forged, the seller is not required to return the funds. Instead, you are required to compensate them for damages to their reputation." A single horrified breath escaped one of the advisors. Layla exhaled, steadying herself. "And here," she said, tracing the final indent, "is the reversal formula I mentioned earlier. It shifts the burden of proof entirely onto you. The seller can claim authenticity. You must prove forgery, and the clause bars you from using external forensic agencies without their approval." She straightened, the weight of what she was saying settling over the room like dust over broken glass. "In plain terms, even if the manuscript is proven fake, you are contractually bound to treat it as genuine. And any attempt to challenge the seller triggers penalties that could exceed the $240 million purchase price." The sheikh's lips parted slightly. Not in confusion. In the slow, dawning rage of a man realizing he was seconds away from signing the most expensive humiliation of his life. The consultant finally lost his composure. "Your Excellency, I assure you, none of this—" "You assured me," the sheikh said, voice dangerously quiet, "that this was perfect." Layla stepped back, retreating into the half-shadow of the chandelier. Not to hide, simply to breathe. The truth was out. The trap laid bare. And in the stillness that followed, one universal understanding pressed against every heart in the room. Deception thrives in confidence, but collapses the moment someone dares to read the fine print. The sheikh pushed the contract away as though it were a live wire. The vellum slid across the obsidian surface with a whisper that sounded almost accusatory. His advisors watched him carefully, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm, as if realizing they had nearly escorted him into a financial execution. Across the table, the consultant's composure finally cracked. "Your Excellency," he said urgently, "this is a misunderstanding. She is overreaching. She doesn't grasp the nuances of—" "The nuances," the sheikh interrupted, voice colder than the marble beneath their feet, almost cost me everything." Silence dropped again, sharp as broken glass. Layla stood motionless, heart pounding, palms damp, breath unsteady. She could feel the tremor in her fingers even with her hands clasped behind her back. She had said too much. She had crossed every boundary. She had violated the invisible rules that kept people like her safe. But the truth had momentum now. And once truth gains speed, it does not ask permission. The historian stepped forward, panicked. "Your Excellency, I assure you the manuscript has been vetted by multiple institutions. If the vellum has anomalies, it may be due to climate exposure during transit." Layla shook her head gently. "That's impossible," she said. Every eye turned to her. She stepped closer to the hologram, summoning all the training she thought she had buried years ago. "This page," she said, rotating the projected folio, "shows microabrasions along the top edge. See them?" The historian squinted it, but nodded reluctantly. "These abrasions," she continued, "were caused by a modern guillotine cutter. These machines leave parallel microscopic scoring, exactly 8 tracks, spaced evenly." She zoomed in further. 8 perfect tracks. "Historical vellum was cut with knives," she said. "Knives leave irregular edges, human hesitation marks, a tremor in the line." She looked at the projection. "Here, the line is too straight." The advisor nearest the sheikh muttered, "Impossible." "Not impossible," she replied softly. "Just recent." The consultant slammed his palm on the table. "This is nonsense. She is a waitress." "And yet," the sheikh said quietly, "she seems to know more than all of you." A flush crept up the consultant's neck. The sheikh leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Why was none of this mentioned in your report?" "Because," the consultant stammered, "because it was irrelevant." "No." The sheikh cut him off, his voice turning lethal. "It was convenient." The room shifted, power moving from experts to a quiet woman in a hotel uniform. The historian spoke desperately. "There must be another explanation." Layla inhaled, closing her eyes for a moment. Then, "There is." She opened them again, steady, unblinking. "This manuscript," she said, "was assembled from fragments of genuine texts and stitched together with modern forgeries. Whoever fabricated it understood enough to imitate authenticity, but not enough to escape a trained eye." She pointed to the contract. "And the legal trap proves the seller knew it." The sheikh's fingers drummed once against the armrest, slow, deliberate, dangerous. "Bring me the seller," he said quietly. No one moved. The consultant's face drained, then pulsed with fear. "Your Excellency, that may not be necessary." "It is very necessary," the sheikh replied. The doors remained closed. No footsteps approached. No one produced a phone, and that was when Layla realized the truth. The seller was not coming, because the seller was already in the room. Some schemes collapse loudly. Others fall apart in the silence of those who suddenly realize they have run out of places to hide. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sheikh's question, "Bring me the seller," hung in the air like a command issued to ghosts. No advisor moved. No security agent lunged for a phone. The consultant avoided the sheikh's eyes with the clumsy precision of a man trying not to look guilty. Layla watched the scene unfold with a slow, dawning clarity. The seller wasn't outside the room, wasn't waiting in a corridor, wasn't stepping out of a limousine somewhere in the driveway. The seller's fingerprints were already all over the contract. She met the consultant's eyes. He looked away too quickly. Her voice emerged before she could stop it. "Your Excellency, I believe the seller is represented by someone present." Two advisors stiffened. The historian swallowed hard. And the consultant, who'd been loud, indignant, offended, suddenly became very, very still. The sheikh shifted his gaze toward him. "Is she correct?" he asked softly. The consultant laughed, a weak, cracking sound. Your Excellency, you can't possibly be taking her word over. Answer the question. A tremor skittered across the consultant's jaw. He inhaled and exhaled. And for a heartbeat, Layla thought he might actually confess. But then he straightened his back, grasping at the last threads of his collapsing performance. I am merely a facilitator, he said. An intermediary. The sheikh's advisor cut in sharply. Intermediaries don't draft contracts with self-protection clauses buried inside obscure syntactic structures. Layla lifted her gaze to the sheikh. His expression didn't show rage. Not yet. Just clarity. The kind that makes a man dangerous. Explain the indemnity clause, he said to the consultant. The consultant faltered. I didn't draft that section myself. No, Layla said softly. But you instructed whoever did. His head whipped toward her. You don't know anything about contract law. I know how to read, she replied, her voice steady. And I know how to recognize a clause written to protect the guilty. He stepped toward her, voice tightening. You're just a server, a child. You have no idea. Enough, the sheikh snapped, the sound pressing every molecule in the room flat. The consultant froze. Layla looked at the contract again, at the ink, at the seal, at the perfect symmetry that betrayed modern tools. She traced the logic backward. Who would have access to a lab that could replicate vellum? Who had relationships with mid-tier auction houses? Who had a reputation for recovering heritage artifacts mysteriously lost for centuries? Then it clicked. A cold realization slid through her. You've done this before, she whispered. The consultant's breath hitched. You recreate pieces that are partially real, she continued. You stitch modern forgeries between genuine fragments. Enough authenticity to survive superficial inspection. Enough fraud to justify the indemnity clause. He turned to the sheikh in desperation. She is inventing— No, Layla said gently. I recognized the seal because I saw it once before, on a fragment that had been rejected by an archive. She swallowed. They rejected it because it was traced back to you. The historian slumped into his chair, realizing he had been part of a staged performance. The advisors exchanged horrified looks. The sheikh's hands tightened on the armrests. The consultant backed away a step, then another. Your Excellency, listen carefully. This can still be managed. But the sheikh wasn't listening anymore. He was studying the contract with the expression of a man who's finally seen the poison mixed into his wine. Sometimes betrayal doesn't enter through the door. Sometimes it's already seated at the table, smiling. The sheikh rose slowly from his chair. Not abruptly, not theatrically, just deliberately. And that made it worse. Everyone in the room straightened. Advisors, historian, even the security behind the mirrored glass seemed to shift in their shadows. The consultant froze mid-step, caught like an animal in the narrow beam of a predator's attention. The sheikh placed both palms on the table. What did you think would happen, he said quietly, when I discovered the truth? The consultant swallowed. Twice. His tongue darted nervously across dry lips. Your Excellency, you must understand. I was trying to protect you from what? The sheikh asked. From a genuine manuscript? Or from discovering you corrupted one? The consultant stammered. The piece had defects. Just defects. Minor issues. But I knew how much you desired. How deeply you wanted. You thought desire would blind me, the sheikh finished. Layla stood very still, her breath held in her chest. She had never seen a man of such wealth look that calm in the face of betrayal. But calm was not safety. Calm was the surface of deep water, hiding the current beneath. The consultant tried again. "I can fix this. I can negotiate a return, arrange a replacement." "There is no replacement," the sheikh said. "Not for trust." A shudder ran through the consultant. And then, trying a different tactic, he turned on Layla. "You!" His voice cracked. "You ruined everything. If you had stayed quiet—" "She saved you," the sheikh cut in. The consultant spun back toward him, stunned. "What?" "She saved me more than any of you did," he said, gesturing to his advisors. "She noticed what you hoped I wouldn't. She spoke when every other person here stayed silent." The historian looked down, shame pooling across his features. The consultant clenched his fists. "You don't understand how these things work. Buyers expect certain imperfections, but as long as the story—" Layla stepped forward, voice trembling but firm. "Forgery built on fragments is still forgery." He turned to her with a chilling, brittle smile. "And you? You think your little linguistic tricks make you special. You think exposing this will change what you are. You're a girl delivering tea." The words hit her like cold water, but before she could react, the sheikh spoke again. "No," he said, "she is the only expert in this room who did not fail." The consultant's expression twisted, fear blooming at the edges of desperation. He tried a final plea. "Your Excellency, if you report this, if you accuse me publicly, the scandal will spread beyond this room. It will damage you as well. Think carefully." The sheikh's eyes narrowed. "You tried to bind me legally to your deception. You counted on my pride. You counted on my vanity. You counted on me being too eager to question." He paused. "You miscalculated." The consultant's breathing quickened. He reached subtly toward his briefcase, too subtly for anyone but Layla, whose eyes had been trained to observe micro-movements long before she ever carried a tray. Her voice sliced through the air. "Don't!" The consultant froze mid-reach. Then, slowly, he lifted his hand away. The sheikh motioned to security. Two silhouettes emerged from behind the mirrored wall, silent and steady. The consultant's face crumpled. "No, Your Excellency. There's no need for—" But there was no stopping the collapse now. He had built his entire scheme on the belief that the sheikh would never listen to the quietest voice in the room. He was wrong. Some truths arrive gently. Others come like a tide that pulls everything hidden into the open. The consultant backed away as security approached, every step smaller than the last, his confidence evaporating into something thin and frantic. All the smoothness, the cultivated charm, the velvet-toned authority he'd wielded so easily earlier. It was gone now, stripped away by the one person he had dismissed without hesitation, Layla. He half laughed, half choked on his own breath as the security officers stepped beside him. "Your Excellency, please. Think about the optics," he pleaded, voice cracking. "This kind of misunderstanding should be handled quietly. No need for escalation." The sheikh leaned back in his chair again, slow, deliberate, unhurried, the posture of someone who had regained control of the narrative. "You attempted to sell me a forgery," he said. "You embedded legal traps to prevent recourse. You leveraged my trust and my name." The consultant's breathing went shallow. "And worst of all," the sheikh continued, "you believed your deception would go unnoticed because the only person capable of seeing it was someone you considered beneath you." "Nurse." The consultant shook his head violently. "That's not—" "Your Excellency, I never— She's nothing but—" "Finish that sentence," the sheikh said quietly, "and you will regret the words even more than the crime." The consultant's mouth snapped shut. Layla felt her pulse stuttering in her throat. She did not want to watch him fall apart. She did not want triumph. She only wanted the truth clear and intact. something she had never been allowed to defend in the life she lost before this job. But the sheikh wasn't finished. He pushed the contract toward the consultant. "This," he said, "is the evidence of your intent." The consultant stared at it as if it were a weapon. Then, unexpectedly, he snapped. "All right," he blurted out. "Fine. Yes, I knew the manuscript was partially constructed. Yes, I had it examined only by people who owed me favors. Yes, the clause protects the seller." He threw his hands up. "But this is how acquisitions work. This is how museums build their collections. This is how governments secure artifacts they want but can't verify." His voice rose into ragged desperation. "Everyone does this." The room recoiled, not from the confession, but from the naked arrogance of it. Even the historian looked sickened. Layla stepped forward slowly, almost gently. "That is why real history keeps losing to manufactured prestige," she said. "Because people like you believe truth is optional." The consultant glared at her, hatred sharp and panicked. "Truth!" he hissed. "You want truth? You think this man would have cared about truth if the manuscript were real? He wants legacy. Legacy doesn't care about authenticity, not when it comes at this price." The sheikh rose again, and suddenly the consultant fell silent. "Legacy built on a lie," the sheikh said, "is not legacy. It is shame." Security placed a hand lightly on the consultant's arm. He flinched. His voice dropped to a final, defeated whisper. "I was so close." The sheikh nodded once to the guards. They escorted him toward the mirrored wall. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He simply stared at the contract in his hands, the object that had been meant to make him powerful, now the instrument of his downfall. And just before he disappeared through the security door, he turned toward Layla. There was no hatred left, only disbelief. "You," he said quietly. "A waitress." But she didn't look away. "A woman who knew how to read," she replied. Security closed the door behind him. The room exhaled, and in that quiet, heavy moment, a truth pulsed beneath the surface of everything. Power is never threatened by ignorance, only by the person who refuses to stay silent. The door closed behind the consultant with a soft hydraulic hiss, the kind of sound that usually signaled privacy. But tonight, it sounded like finality. The sheikh stood still for a moment, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the obsidian table as if trying to reconcile the near disaster he had almost signed into reality. No one dared speak. Even the shadows in the mirrored glass held their breath. Layla remained where she stood, near the end of the table, half in the light, half in the dark. Invisibly visible. Visibly invisible. Her uniform felt too tight around her ribs, her pulse too loud in her ears. But she kept her posture straight. She had revealed too much. She had crossed every line. And she had no idea what the consequences would be. The sheikh finally turned toward his advisors. "Were any of you aware?" he asked. A single advisor, older, sharp-eyed, with a reputation for caution, shook his head immediately. The others followed, some too quickly, some too defensively. "Then you failed," the sheikh said simply. The words landed softly, almost gently, but their impact was devastating. The advisors stiffened, knowing the judgment was final, not because he shouted, but because he didn't need to. He dismissed them with a flick of his hand. They hesitated. He didn't repeat himself. They left. The door clicked shut. Now the room held only 3 people: the sheikh, the historian, and Layla. The historian looked smaller now, like a man who had spent his whole life curating authority, only to watch it crumble under the weight of one waitress's quiet conviction. He wiped his glasses, avoided the sheikh's gaze, and murmured, "Your Excellency, I had no knowledge of the forgery." "I believe you," the sheikh said, "but believing you does not excuse your failure." The historian's shoulders sagged. "Please, allow me to resign with dignity." The sheikh paused, then nodded. The historian gathered his papers with trembling hands, packed them into a leather folio, and bowed before leaving the room. The soft sound of the door closing behind him felt like the final tile of a collapsing mosaic. Now it was just the sheikh and Layla. She kept her eyes down. She did not trust her voice. She did not trust this moment. Not yet. He walked to the table, picked up the contract, and examined it one more time. This time with the eyes of a man who had been forced to confront the razor-thin edge between confidence and catastrophe. Finally he spoke. "You saw what none of them did." Layla swallowed. I shouldn't have spoken." He looked at her surprised, then, very faintly, amused. "If you hadn't spoken," he said, "I would have signed away more than money." She said nothing. He continued. "You gave me truth, not deference." Her breath caught. He held the contract between two fingers. Then, slowly, he tore it in half. The sound was soft, but somehow louder than anything else that had happened tonight. He dropped the shredded pieces on the table. "Tell me something," he said, voice quieter now. "A question only someone like you can answer." She lifted her gaze. His eyes were focused. No arrogance, no irritation, only clarity. "When did you know?" he asked. She hesitated. "Which part?" she whispered. "All of it," he said. "The fraud, the trap, the construction." She took a breath, steady and thin. The moment the vellum cracked, the sheikh nodded slowly, absorbing it, and for the first time that night, something shifted between them. Not hierarchy, not fear, but recognition. Some truths arrive as warnings, others as invitations to finally be seen. The salon felt different now. Emptier, quieter, but not peaceful. The chandelier's silver light no longer gleamed with the confident shine it held earlier. Now it cast long, thin shadows that stretched across the obsidian table like strands of unspoken consequence. The sheikh stood at the head of that table, studying Layla with an intensity that made her want to fold back into the invisibility she had mastered, but she held her posture. Barely. "You said the manuscript was assembled from fragments," he began. "Explain that." "What?" Her breath hitched, but she answered. "Some parts were genuine," she said softly, "likely stolen from existing folios. Others were modern inserts made to mimic missing sections. Whoever forged it blended authenticity and fabrication so seamlessly that only someone trained in both classical linguistics and material analysis would see the breakpoints." The sheikh's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted around him. An inward recalibration. "And you," he said, "saw every one of those breakpoints." She lowered her gaze again. It was my field. Before." The sheikh frowned. "Before what?" She swallowed. "Before the debt. Before my visa complications. Before the program withdrew funding. I had to take whatever work I could find." A breath. "I didn't expect to ever use that training again. Not here. Not like this." The sheikh walked slowly around the table, not approaching her, just circling, thinking. When he finally stopped, he stood close enough that she could feel the weight of his attention, but far enough that the formality of the moment remained intact. "Every advisor I employ," he said, "has a resume longer than your entire life." She stiffened, unsure where he was going. "And yet," he continued, "none of them protected me tonight. None of them challenged the narrative. None of them noticed the danger." He paused. "You did." Her throat tightened. He gestured toward the torn contract. "You saved me from signing what would have become one of the greatest financial humiliations of my career." She shook her head. "Anyone with proper training would have caught it." "No," he said firmly. Anyone with training would have respected the experts. You challenged them quietly, precisely, and without hesitation when it mattered. Layla's breath trembled. He studied her for another long moment, then said, "There is a forensic institute I fund. Small, discreet, highly specialized. They focus on manuscript authentication, provenance reconstruction, and fraud detection." He paused. "They need someone who sees what others overlook." She blinked, stunned. I'm not qualified anymore." "That is not what I saw tonight." Silence stretched between them. Her pulse thudded so hard she thought the room could hear it. "I don't want an answer now," the sheikh said. "Think about it. I will arrange for you to meet the institute's director tomorrow if you wish." Tomorrow. Her mind reeled. A day ago she was refilling tea and hiding inside her own silence. Now a path she buried years ago had resurfaced with terrifying clarity. She forced herself to breathe. "Why me?" she whispered. He didn't hesitate, because truth needs people who refuse to be unseen. Layla felt something she had not felt in years, something fragile, something frightening, possibility, but also fear. Because stepping into visibility meant giving up the invisibility that had protected her all this time. The sheikh began to walk toward the exit. He stopped at the door, looking back only once. "You don't owe anyone silence," he said quietly. "Not even yourself." He stepped out, and the door closed with a soft, final click. Layla remained alone in the great dining salon, the torn contract still lying on the table like a remnant of a world she had almost watched implode. Some moments don't end chapters. They open the door to the life you thought you lost forever. The sun filtered through tall windows, landing on shelves lined with manuscripts. Real ones this time. Genuine vellum. Authentic ink, pages that breathed with the weight of centuries. Layla stood in the center of the small forensic analysis room at the institute, her institute now, wearing a linen coat instead of a uniform. Her hands were steady as she examined a 14th century folio under angled light, searching for irregularities in the fibers. Outside her office, younger researchers whispered her name with admiration she still didn't quite know how to absorb. She had a salary, a stable visa, her own apartment with plants she'd somehow kept alive, and, most unexpectedly, a reputation. Quiet, precise, respected. Every so often, the sheikh visited the institute, never announcing himself. He would simply stand at the doorway, watching her work with a small nod of acknowledgement. Not gratitude anymore. Recognition. She never explained how she found the courage to speak that night. She wasn't sure herself, but she understood something now. The world had not changed. She had. She was no longer the invisible woman in the corner of a room full of powerful men. She had stepped out of the shadow and into the precise, demanding clarity of truth. And for the first time in her life, the truth made space for her too. If you want more stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.